Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I am really excited for today's show. I am getting to talk about something that I don't get to talk about a lot in this room, and that is gender equality, actually. And not that we're opposed to it here at Colorado Business Roundtable, I should say that. It's just not something that comes up very often, but I am excited for it. And I have in studio with me Katica Roy. Katica, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Katica Roy, she is with Pipeline Equity. You are the CEO of that. You're also a gender economist, which is a title I really want to get into with you, and also an award-winning speaker. So how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here today.
Wonderful. So I actually would love to get right in. Let's talk about your background and particularly how we got around to being a gender economist.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my background, my professional history, so I have an undergraduate degree in political science and legal studies emphasis. I thought about becoming a lawyer and decided not to do that, but I happen to be pretty good at technology, and this was back in the days of DOS-based systems when it was keystrokes. There were no windows just yet. And so I went back and got actually my first master's degree at CU Denver in educational technology, which is a combination of behavioral science and cognitive science. And then I went to DU about 15 years later and got an MBA.
Congratulations. I, for one, and Colorado Business Roundtable in general, we are big on the education forefront. Mm-hmm. And actually, we have an exciting event coming up April 11th that is going to be at History Colorado, and that is the Higher Education Forum. Yes, State of Higher Education Forum. So we have lots of Colorado universities coming to speak at that. So you've seen your fair share of Colorado universities. Are you a native?
No, I'm not. I was born and raised in Napa Valley, California.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, gorgeous. Do you miss it?
No.
I say the same thing. I don't miss my hometown. I miss my family, but and visiting is great.
Mm-hmm. It was a great place to grow up, but I like Colorado. I like the pioneer aspect, the feet solidly on the ground. I like living in a purple state.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And actually, we've gone all blue.
Well,
just recently.
Yes, and we are still very purple if you look at the entire state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we got your education that we talked about. Let's talk about your pathway to Pipeline and what got you on this train to really get behind creating Pipeline Equity.
So a couple of things. There's my family history and then my personal story.
Yeah.
So if we kind of go way back, I am the daughter of an immigrant and a refugee.
Wow.
So and my mother was actually an orphan because of World War II. So she was born on Guernsey and separated in 1939, separated from her mom and 4 siblings at the age of 18 months and put in an orphanage, and then adopted a year later. Came to the U.S. when she was 21 in search of opportunity and equality. My father and 3 eldest sisters are actually refugees, and they escaped from Hungary after the fall of the 1956 revolution. They crossed the border into Austria, lived in a refugee camp for just under 2 months when President Eisenhower sent Air Force One to bring 21 Hungarian refugees to the U.S. on Christmas Day, 1956. And they were part of the 21 Hungarian refugees.
That's amazing. That's absolutely fascinating to hear. I would love to get your opinion on the refugee situation, but I don't know that we'll have time
you
for
can
it
bring
in
me
this
back
show.
for that.
I will
in
bring you
June.
back for that. Exactly. So yeah, that's fascinating. And then your personal story leading into that, your family, obviously big background, and I'm sure there was a lot of inequality that you saw along the way, and maybe your parents and siblings got treated pretty unfairly.
Yeah, I think, certainly there were my sister's story. I mean, they were incredibly grateful to be in the U.S. for sure, but they definitely coming here and not speaking the language, and there was definitely that transition. The other thing is that I'm the youngest of 6 kids, 5 girls, so I saw the sort of trials and tribulations that my sisters and their families went through because of their lack of economic opportunity, and thought, I never want to do that. I remember as a little girl thinking, I never want to do that. And so when I have two kids, when I grew up and entered the workforce, I didn't really think, I'd studied as a poli-sci major, you learn about women's rights, you learn about the women's movement. And I thought, oh, that's super interesting. I really don't think that's relevant now. And I don't think it'll impact me. And so I really focused on building my career like most people do when they go into the workforce. And then the first time it sort of came up that I was being treated differently because of my gender. At this point, I had been a breadwinner mom for, I think, 3 years, and it was after my daughter was born. And my boss was optimized, which is a fancy word for fired. And when I came back 2 days after I came back from maternity leave, I was asked to take on a new team, and then 2 weeks later another team. And I already had a team I was managing, so that meant I had 3 teams. And my male colleague, who was lovely, was 1 pay grade higher than I was. He took on 1 new team and received additional compensation, and I didn't receive anything. And so I called HR, my new boss, and said, well, what,
hello.
Well, I was trying to be collaborative. So I said, well, how do we want to work this out? And I didn't hear anything. So as a political science major with a legal studies emphasis, I thought, well, there's got to be something. And so I called HR and said, this is a Lilly Ledbetter issue. Every time you pay me, the statute of limitations starts over. What do you want to do about it?
Good for you.
So
good for you.
And I thought, and I think that was the first realization that one, that I was being treated differently because I had never really thought that was true, and 2, that I wasn't alone. That was the other thing. There were more stories that were coming out at that time because I thought, am I the only one that this is happening to? And then 3, I was a breadwinner mom. So my husband is a stay-at-home dad, and he has been for over 10 years, almost 11 years. And the idea that equal pay wasn't just about women, it was about families. And the question of why did my kids have less opportunity simply because their mom was the breadwinner? Right. And that was the first idea of, okay, maybe we can do something different to solve this.
And obviously that has worked out pretty well in your favor with the foundation of pipeline equity. I actually want to ask you, any reasoning behind the name there?
Yes, to fix the leaky pipeline of women in the workforce.
I like that. All right. Because I kept looking, I'm like, pipeline, you want a talent pipeline, things like that. You want to make sure you're doing it right. But to fix the leaky pipeline.
Yes.
Yes, I like that a lot, actually. So founded in 2017.
Yes.
Yes, in April of 2007. So you're coming up on your 2-year anniversary.
We are.
Yeah.
So we were founded actually April 4th, 2017, which was Equal Pay Day in 2017.
Nice. Okay. I feel like that was rather prophet-like of you.
Yeah.
To do that. So you have an amazing personal background. You've clearly been touched by all of this, and in general, most women have. We've all, whether we are stay-at-home moms, and there's a lack. As you said, this is not a women's issue. This is a family issue. And no matter what your family looks like, you are touched by this. Yes. So I want to get more into the background and current projects that you have going on with pipeline equity.
Sure. So some of the background is that we actually, Pipeline started actually with a study, not with the building of our software. So we're a cloud software platform. The product right now, what it does is it's the company's data, our algorithms. We intercept HR decisions across the 5 pillars of talent, which are hiring, pay, performance, potential, and promotion. We provide recommendations and essentially provide companies a clear pathway to achieving gender equity through the decisions they're already making. But we didn't start with software. What we started with, and this goes back to the question about what's a gender economist,
yes,
was a study. And we did a study across 4,000 companies in 29 countries. And what we found was that for every 10% increase in gender equity toward parity, toward 50-50, there's a 1% to 2% increase in revenue.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So it's not only a social issue
Yeah.
or whether or not people believe it's a social issue, it's fundamentally a massive economic opportunity. So that model then is embedded in our platform.
Yes. I like specifically that you said these are made through decisions that they're already making. So
Yes.
you're not changing anyone's business plans here to get on the map.
Correct.
Yeah. Do you mind explaining that in a little more detail for me?
Sure. So for instance, they would post a job requisition in their HR platform. So it could be Workday or ADP or SuccessFactors. That sends a notification to the pipeline platform that they need for a recommendation. And in that instance, it's a slate of candidates.
Okay.
And we actually look at internal candidates. And the reason is that the best way to attract diverse talent is to ensure that your existing diverse talent is successful and not right.
That makes sense. I've never heard that, but that makes complete sense.
Yeah, and not just in their current role, but across your company. So we look at all your data. We provide you the best folks for the job, and then we apply a gender lens to it.
I like that. So how do we measure this gender gap? I know that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. So let me start with, because I think it's important to talk about it from a labor economics perspective,
Yeah.
and then we can talk about what it looks like in companies.
I like that.
Right. So a gender economist looks at gender equity through the lens of economics, right? And primarily through the lens of labor economics, which is really three pieces. One is education attainment. So what level of education do people have? The second is labor force participation. So what is the labor force participation? Is it full-time? Is it part-time? And then the last is wages. So what are people earning? And it's those three pieces taken together that actually impact on a macro. So if you look at, for instance, Colorado as a state and our state GDP, the impact that has on from an economic perspective.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
And what's interesting
Yes.
in the state of Colorado is that we have, in the United States, the state of Colorado is second highest for education attainment by women, but we are 13th in labor force participation.
Interesting.
Yes.
Huh.
And
So let's break that down.
Yeah. So essentially we have a really highly educated women who live in Colorado, but they're not participating in the workforce at the same rate as their education attainment. And why that matters is for 2 years running, our economic outlook in Colorado, while good and while we're growing faster than the nation, which is good, one of so when CU does their annual look at projections around the Colorado state economy, for 2 years running, they've actually downgraded it because of lack of access to talented labor.
Yeah.
And there's been a push to get California companies and California labor to move here, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
We should have an equal push to get more women back into the workforce
All right.
or participating full time.
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about that specifically when it comes to women coming back in full times. We'll just take a look at that right there. A lot of women tend to stay at home part time when their kids are younger, and then when the kids are older and out of the house, things like that, they go back full time. What kind of, I guess, implementations can companies use to gather those women?
Well, the best thing would be to not have them leave in the first place.
All right. Well, that's actually a good tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happens, so 90% of women who leave when they have children, that's when they leave. It's not why they leave. They actually leave for other reasons than having a child. It's just more socially acceptable for them to say that they're leaving because they had a child. Yes. And because they already they face headwinds already in the workforce. And then when you have a child, you face even stronger headwinds because essentially what the research shows is that there's a perception that you're not as committed to your work. What they've actually found through research is that working moms are the most productive employees over the course of their careers.
I actually have read that and would 1000% agree with you. I grew up with a working mom. My sister is a working mom. I am not a mom, but if I were, I would work. And I feel like I've seen a lot of women be productive. Not saying that you can't be productive without children or otherwise, but that is an interesting note.
Yes.
I like that. Overall, big picture, why is this gender gap a concern? Why should I care? I do. I'm a woman. I do care.
You care.
But
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So I talked about the study that we did, which showed that for every 10% increase in gender equity, there's a 1 to 2% increase in revenue. And we can cut that research, it's our original research, by industry and employer size. So how many employees you have. And as a CEO, your job is to maximize shareholder value. That's what you get paid for. And this is a really important lever in how you actually expand the economic pie of your company. That's why you should care. You can either care or not care about the social issue. Fundamentally, it's a massive economic opportunity.
so you're going to make money.
You're going to make more money.
Yeah, that's. I don't know that many business owners wouldn't appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's look at how they make that money.
So more diverse teams have, so it's basically functioning at the team level. That is, more diverse teams actually outperform non-diverse teams. And that's where that secret sauce is. They come with different perspectives. Those perspectives are actually heard. So they actually, depending on what it could be sales teams, which gender diverse sales teams largely outperform their non-gender diverse peers. They could have, better products, more innovation, and all of that drives forward more opportunities for business.
Yes, absolutely. And by outperform, we are talking economically speaking.
Yeah, that's right.
More money.
That's right.
Period.
That's right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. We just deal with top line revenue.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's revenue. We don't look at profit. There are studies that look at profitability because that's so business model dependent. Mm-hmm. It's just very difficult to do that across companies. So we look at top line.
All right. And to reiterate, Pipeline deals with all industries, correct? Mm-hmm. Or do you have a specific area?
We do deal with all industries. We work with primarily enterprise companies, and we identify those as companies that have 10,000 employees or more.
Okay.
Where we see the most traction right now, but we're not limited to those industries, are tech, restaurant and retail, and financial services.
Tech, retail, and financial services.
Okay. Restaurant and retail. And they, if you look at the composition of those industries, they have different challenges for different reasons. And so for them, solving the gender equity gap is important. And if you look at it from a talent perspective, it essentially increases your talent pool, the number of skilled workers that you can access to work in your company.
Inevitably. Yeah. I love hearing that. So we've got about 5 minutes left in this segment. Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you about some future projects. What's on the horizon for Pipeline? If you can. I'm certainly not trying to steal your secrets.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So some of the things that I can talk about versus the things that I can't yet talk about. So, last year on April 10th last year was Equal Pay Day in the U.S. And former Governor Hickenlooper actually gave us a proclamation that day, renaming it Equity for All Day in the state of Colorado. And that was in recognition of the work that Pipeline has done to close the gender equity gap. And then Lieutenant Governor Donna Lynn actually came to an event and presented us with the proclamation, which was amazing. So this April 10th, we're actually having an event, and it's actually half sold out, but we still have some tickets left if folks would like to attend. And what we'll actually be talking about is March 1st, which was the first day of Women's History Month, we released the next version of our platform. And a key part of that was actually the next generation of our performance platform. And why that matters is this. And the World Economic Forum wrote an article that featured Pipeline about this, which is that if you want to close the gender pay gap, you cannot start with pay.
Interesting. You have to start with
performance. You have to start with performance.
Performance.
Yeah. So pay, so we talk a lot about the gender pay gap, and it's talked about sort of an aggregate level as an opportunity gap, and then there's equal pay for equal work. There's a couple of different ways to look at it. The reason why you can't start with pay is because once you get to pay, the value that you've already placed on your talent is already decided. You've already made that decision upstream in performance, so how people are performing, what their performance ratings are, and then for many enterprise companies in potential, that is who makes up your succession pipeline. And those two pieces, once you get those value calculations right, which is part of what we do, pay pretty much is a foregone conclusion.
Right.
And so at the April 10th event, to come bring that full circle, which will be the second Equity for All Day in the state of Colorado, we will actually be talking about that, and we'll be modeling it out. So I'll give you a sneak peek. What Pipeline has found is that on average, women for similar work, similar performance reviews, women receive lower performance ratings 4% of the time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but modeled over the talent pipeline, it actually emulates what we see in the current talent in the current workforce, which is that women start out at their 46% of the labor base, 51% of entry-level positions. They make up 22% of all C-level positions. It's pretty similar to that. Okay. So if you can solve that, now we get to solving issues like having parity at the C-suite level, having parity in boards, and not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's really good for companies.
Yes, absolutely. I want to ask you, how many women do you have employed at your company? What's your ratio?
We're 50-50.
You are 50-50. Yeah. Exciting. Yeah.
Sometimes it moves a little bit,
of
but
course.
We're 50-50. And half the women that work at Pipeline are women of color.
Oh, cool. Also very nice. Again, that diversity. Because as you said, the more diverse your team, they will always outperform a non-diverse team.
Yes.
Which is exciting. I want to ask you the importance, too, because some people feel like you have to have that 50-50 level.
Yeah.
That can't be the same across industries. There's just inevitably going to be industries that will attract more men or more women.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? So we always set, and a couple of things on the 50-50. It's not just 50-50 in your workforce. There are things that matter like pay gap, like span of control, how many resources do men versus women control, what that looks like in your quota carrying versus non-quota carrying employees, as well as upward mobility, right? It's more than just we always tell people we're not a Count Your Women app. Right? It's not just about the pure numbers. But when we look at that, one of the things that we see is, for instance, just tech. You take tech as an example, right? So there's a lot of talk about getting women in tech, getting women in computer science, in particular, so technology and engineering really being the pieces of that. Well, you can solve the incoming pipeline from middle school to high school to degrees, but half of all women in tech will leave within the first 10 years. If we don't solve that issue, it doesn't really matter what we solve upstream. And the best way to change the upstream numbers is to retain the people that are currently there.
Well, yeah, you need a model to go off of. You need someone to say, oh, look, she's been doing this for a long time. She didn't just start her career here and move into another area or become stay-at-home mom. But that is exciting stuff. So I like that you're reiterating it's not just about making sure you have 50% men, 50% women. There's a lot more that goes into that. Unfortunately, we have to take a quick break, but I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. You can find more information in the description box below. So stay with us. We'll be right back on Connect and Collaborate. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, here with Katica Roy of Pipeline Equity. I would love to talk today. I really would. I'm so sorry. But we're having a fascinating conversation, and we're talking about the gender pay gap, gender inequality, making sure you have a diverse workforce. There's a lot that goes into this conversation, actually, and I'm enjoying myself. I'm learning a lot today, and I really appreciate it. We took off in the last segment here talking about women in your company, and do you need to aim for that 50-50%? But I like that you, we were talking on the break here, and you mentioned if companies already at 34%, you're not looking to dig those numbers out and make sure they make that 50%. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So when we go into companies, we look at what's the current state. So if women make up, say, 34% of your workforce, then we're looking to ensure that they have equal opportunity across all levels of your workforce. So if women make up 34% of your workforce, at some point through the decisions that you're already making, we would look at how do we get you to 34% of the C-suite actually being women. So we're not looking to, when we look at companies, we're not looking to make changes to how, what their pay philosophies are or how they do performance reviews. What we are doing is using data and advanced technologies to ensure that all of those practices are applied equitably.
Yes. Perfect. I love hearing that. And I appreciate the clarification, because
Yes.
I know that I had a lot of questions after the break. But I also want to look at this. The gender inequality impacts men as well. They
Yes.
are not the perpetrators of this.
No.
We are not the victims as women. It impacts men too.
Yes. So a couple of things. One of the things we talk about this, which is why equity for all. So gender equity is fundamentally about equity for all, when you look at it through the lens of economics, is that men are not the problem. Right. Women are not the damsels in distress that need rescuing. That in fact, the gender equity conversation, and gender equity is not a synonym for women's rights. In fact, women are 50% of the conversation, and men are actually the other 50%. So you could look at that a few different ways, and we only have we don't have hours, so I'll condense this down. But a couple of things. One, if you just look at it through my family composition, and 45.2% of Colorado families, women are the breadwinners, right? So I'm the breadwinner of my family. That's true for 45% of families in the state of Colorado with children under the age of 18. So if that's true, then, and it is, you look at, like, my husband, gender inequity impacts him too. He's a stay-at-home dad, right? The other piece of that is that 48% of working dads, so 48% of working dads that are actually currently in the workforce, would like to stay home with their children. And so gender equity impacts their ability to actually do that. And it's not only because they're the equal opportunity of their partners, it's also because of the definition of what we have defined of what it means to be a man. And in the state of Colorado, there's about I actually know this number, 26,659 at last count, stay-at-home dads out of a population of over 5 million. And what stay-at-home dads often face is identity and isolation.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So who am I? And who am I going to talk to? Like, I'm not going to go on the mommy and me play dates. Like, that's not.
It's hard to relate to somebody else. And those can get a little clicky on their own anyway. But
exactly. So we need to bring everybody to the table and talk about how ultimately this actually is about having everybody's voices in the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you know the exact number of stay-at-home dads. But I think we are moving into a nice space. I think we're getting there. We're obviously having conversations, which is part of the problem, right? What is it? Knowing is half the battle. Thanks, G.I. Joe, right? So as long as we are getting the conversation out there and going on with that, I think we're making some headway. Maybe not as much as we'd like to. I want to talk about unconscious versus conscious gender bias.
Yeah. So unconscious. So I think talking about bringing people to the conversation, I think there's a fear of being wrong and a fear of talking. Like, if I don't,
you think people don't want to be wrong?
Fear of talking. Like, if I talk about this, I might say the wrong thing, and it's just better not to say anything, right? And so having unconscious bias doesn't make us bad people. It makes us human. Right?
Yeah.
The issue is when it actually impacts somebody else's life, and that's what we're ultimately trying to solve for. So that is without going into a lot of the brain science, we've essentially made patterns in our brains. We then attach meaning to that when we see something like that. So that's what we're looking to disrupt.
Gotcha.
And what we say is unconscious bias. One of the things that Pipeline says is unconscious bias meet conscious action. So if we show it to you, now you're choosing not to do something, which is very different than choosing to do something.
Okay, I love hearing that. And to get on more clarity here, as humans, we create bias. Period.
Yeah.
That is part of human nature. You've had examples in your life where things happen, and you reiterate
For
that.
sure.
Yeah, that's a little bit.
Some of it is like to keep you safe.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, like
right.
if you see a truck barreling toward you, right?
Like you don't step out.
You need to get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
So there, you know, there's Daniel Kahneman wrote a book. It's a very long book, but it's called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And essentially it's the same thing.
Okay. Oh, I like that. I'm going to have to check that out. Thank you. But I like that you give companies their chance to become more of, and being aware. So you want conscious gender bias to make better decisions.
Yeah, you want to make decisions consciously. You
Right.
ultimately would like to not have bias in your decision making, which is essentially preferring one group over another.
Absolutely. That's ultimate goals, I think, for all of us in life.
Yeah.
It should be anyway. I want to talk about some barriers to women in leadership.
Yeah.
And we'll start with the most famous one, the glass ceiling.
The glass ceiling.
Yes. I'm still banging. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So the glass ceiling, as it's defined, we have a little bit different definition at Pipeline, but the glass ceiling, as it's defined externally, is has a woman ever held a position, right? So, so that's you know they're often folks will talk about that. That's fine. We define it as, so if you have 34% of your employee population, and let's say, you know, at your manager role, you also have 34%, but then you drop to 25% at your director role, well, your glass ceiling is manager role, because there's now a difference in the decision making. And why that matters, so when the glass ceiling is talked about externally, it is looking at the upward progression of women and essentially pattern matching to what a leader looks like. So I wrote an article that talked about close your eyes, think about what a CEO looks like. What is that person? You know, it's typically tall, maybe someone in their mid 50s or 60s, male, graying hair, right? You know,
I actually imagine a well-dressed woman in, you know, the Louboutins that I want one day.
So, but so it's that pattern matching
Yeah.
that ultimately then leads to the glass ceiling.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. You have written down here. We have written down here the glass cliff, which is something I've never heard of.
Yeah. So one of the sayings is that when women break the glass ceiling, they get pushed off the glass cliff.
Well, of course, because inevitably there's got to be another tumble point somewhere, right? We get up there and then.
Yeah. So what that looks like is typically when a company is in crisis, they will look for someone who doesn't match the pattern. Right. So if you think about Theresa May in the UK, you think about Marissa Mayer at Yahoo. There are other examples that essentially you're looking for someone who doesn't match the pattern. So women, when they tend to break glass ceilings, they tend to step into roles with a higher probability of failure than a higher probability of success, because the situation already has some sort of crisis in it. Okay. That's the glass cliff. So essentially you're set up to fail from the very beginning. It doesn't mean that you will fail.
Right.
It just means that the odds are even more stacked against you.
And so you can't have a glass cliff without a glass ceiling.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
You can.
Yeah.
They just tend often to be connected.
Okay.
But they are not always connected.
Not always.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure on that one.
Yeah.
Because again, that was a concept I hadn't heard of before, and that's an interesting concept to say the least. And I want to talk next about the golden skirt.
So the golden skirt phenomenon, it'll be interesting actually to see what happens in California, because California passed last year a law. So this is the first year requiring gender diversity on boards, and there's a time frame to get caught up. That phenomenon actually was more studied in Europe, where they have quotas for women on boards. And what they found was, so this goes back to the glass ceiling and ensuring that you have diverse talent pools and you're tapping into diverse talent pools, is that one woman would then sit on multiple boards. So so the issue is then not, one, she's spread pretty thin in terms of her capacity. The second is that, in fact, it doesn't provide the opportunity that folks were intending.
You're double dipping.
Yeah, or quadruple or quintuple.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's and boards in particular, because it's such a network game. Yes, we have retained recruiters who work on boards, but primarily it's who you know. That also becomes an issue because women aren't always in those networks. So ensuring that we have there is a diverse pool. We just need to tap into it.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So we have the glass ceiling, the glass cliff, and golden skirt.
Yeah.
So all of these clearly play a role in women in the workplace. So how do we combat these? And how can we be better companies and rise above these issues?
Yeah. So I think in the gender equity space, oftentimes the conversation is a lot about the problem and not enough about the solution. And people either say, "Oh, I've heard that already. I don't want to hear it again," or we need a solution. So if you look at an enterprise company that has 10,000 employees, there are really three key decisions that they make across their talent every single year: performance, potential, and pay. So for that company, that's 30,000 opportunities for them to move toward gender equity every single year. That's how we combat these really kind of big, amorphous, confusing, sometimes controversial issues, is through data and through decisions we're already making and through having a really clear path. And those seemingly little decisions, so 1 out of 10,000, 3 out of 30,000, those taken collectively ultimately move the needle a lot.
Okay.
And you do that over years, and you do it over companies, and now all of a sudden you don't have so much of a glass ceiling and you don't have the glass cliff. So for instance, and not to be political at all, but if you just look at the 2020 who's running for office, we have more women running for office. So there's less of that focus on just that one woman running for office. So it begins to change the dynamics.
Once you get a few people in there, it gets easier to put a few more in every year. I'm gonna ask you this because this was my experience. I was in the aviation industry before I moved over into journalism and communications. And one of the things that I kept seeing, because in aviation, pilots tend to be more men. There has been a push, obviously, to have a more diverse workforce. So a lot more women are getting hired, and that's exciting. One of the things I continually heard from male pilots that got picked over were, "Oh, they're just trying to meet a women's quota. That's why she got hired over me." It's sad, but that is a true statement that a lot of people say across industries. It's not just in aviation. I'm sure it's something you've heard somewhere, perhaps in a different industry. But how do we combat that in the workplace? Because I would just giggle and move on. My job wasn't impacted, so I never really stood up for that. But
and I think, so just to address that, it's not often, and then I'll answer your other question.
Fair.
So to talk about that, we have often made the issue of gender equity in the workforce a women problem.
Yes.
Right? So if we just fix the women, it'll be fine. We just need to teach them to apply for jobs and to learn to negotiate and to change how they speak and the uptick in their speech. No, that's not the issue. Like, the women negotiate as much as men. That's what the research shows. We just win less, half as often, and 2/3 of the time there's a negative perception of us, right? So it's not that we don't do those things. It's that we don't value women doing those things. Okay. That's the shift that has to happen. And your experience, which is not unique to you, right, is that we often place it on people themselves to speak up. And while that matters, anytime you are going to use your voice at your job, it is an economic decision. Yeah. Because there may be a downside to using your voice, and you need to weigh that. And if you have a family, that matters even more. Right. You know, I talked about fighting to be paid equitably. That was not an easy decision because I thought there could be a real economic downside for me, and not just me, but for people collectively, right? So that piece matters. That's one. The second is that what we find, and this is what the data shows, is that actually women are as qualified, if not more qualified, and not to create some sort of weird zero-sum game, than men. We're 57% of all college graduates. That number is projected to continue. We have to work as hard, if not harder, to be promoted. So it's not that it's just that we don't match the pattern.
Okay. So changing the pattern is what we're doing here, particularly with pipeline equity.
And ultimately, if you had more gender diversity in your pilots, for instance, you could increase, you would have more diversity of thought, you would have more innovation, you would ultimately lead to growing that airline, and then you could lead to more opportunity for everyone. I mean, if you just look at a company like Salesforce, they talk about gender equality. The thing they're most known for is closing the gender pay gap. They've done it 3 times. They're doing just fine.
Right. Yes, I agree. They are doing just fine. I'm gonna go in here a little bit more local. We're gonna talk about Senate Bill 19, which is the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act that is happening in Colorado. As of right now, there's not been a decision made. It is being decided upon. I want to talk a little bit about this. So essentially, it's a bill that would prohibit Colorado employers from considering a job applicant's past salary history when determining her pay rate. Number 2. Her and his. You are right. I apologize for that. Number 2, require employers to post job openings and the wage rate for such job openings to all employees. And number 3, allow employees to recover up to 3 years of back pay for unequal pay, plus liquidated damages and attorney's fees. And so that bill is moving forward in the Senate, being decided upon. So we'll see that one. I think they're going to wait on that one until the end. They're going to make us bite our nails until the end of the legislative session to see anything. But yeah. So let's talk about that and what that means for Coloradans.
So I mean, just to be totally clear, I'm in favor of it, and I actually went up on the Hill and testified. But I talked about it through not as an issue of fairness. I testified in terms of the economics of the state of Colorado.
Right.
That's always our perspective, is to look at it through the lens of economics, look at the data, see what does the data say, and then define it that way. So if you look at, originally the bill was 6 years because the federal law is 2 years. So when it passed out of committee, the modification was 3 years. So that was a change that happened. Often it's not discovered for years, pay gaps. So if you just look at the DU law school case, that was years and years, and then there's only so much you can actually recover. So that was one. It also, the negotiating based on prior salary, and we're not the first state to do that. 12 states currently have that in place, Massachusetts being the first. All it does is ensure that the negotiation is happening based on market rates, not based on previous salary, right? And what happens is that if men or women have experienced a wage gap in their very first job, that wage gap then continues for the life of their career. And it can be $500,000, it can be $1 million over the course of, when you talk in compounding interest, all of that. So when we step back from that, I talked a little bit about the gap between education attainment and labor force participation. Wages has a lot to do with that. 45% of households in the state of Colorado, women are the breadwinners. It impacts that. On average, women in the state of Colorado earn 82 cents to the rate of men. And when you add diverse classes in there, namely Latina and African American, it's even worse. So it's fundamentally about making it better for everyone, and ultimately that's good for business. It's not, I think one of the issues is that sometimes when we look at labor laws, which is what this is, and additional protections for labor, it's viewed through the lens of a zero-sum game. Business wins, labor loses. And in actual fact, this is good for business, and it is also good for labor.
Right, that rising tide raising all boats. Mm-hmm. Yes. So we have 3 minutes left. Final thoughts, anything that you want to make sure our audience, or that I'm taking away alive, tons of notes today, but final thoughts on as far as pipeline equity, closing this gender gap, getting rid of unconscious gender bias, or making sure your conscious gender bias is in check.
Yeah. We look at it, again, I think for us, a couple of things. One, we look at it through the lens of economics. So it's fundamentally about improving the economic pie for everyone. And it is not a zero-sum game. I mean, in the state of Colorado, if we close the gender gap, we could increase our state's economy by $40 billion.
Wow.
That's insubstantial.
Huge. Yeah.
That is a lot of money. One of the things that we set out to do after we did the research study was to say, could we create a platform that would make gender equity possible in our lifetime? And what's interesting is that in the last 2 years, we've added 47 years to the time to global gender equality. Globally, and then also in the U.S. and Canada, so North America, it has been, I think, 7 years. So we're actually going backward. And our goal was, could we make it possible in our lifetime? And in actual fact, we did. So one of the things that we talk about is no longer is it a question of if we can close the gender equity gap, it's will we choose to. The choice is ours now to make this possible, and we can do it.
We can do it. I love that. So top tips for employees to make sure that they're looking at hiring the best diverse employee. The
best way to attract diverse or any talent is to ensure the equitable treatment of your existing talent.
Okay.
So that your best employer brand ambassadors are your existing employees. So ensuring equitable opportunity, ensuring that your business is continuing to grow, that ultimately will lead to them saying, hey, Alex, you should come work with me. That, we've got a job opening. That's the best way that you can actually continue to grow your company.
Awesome. Where can I find more information about Pipeline Equity?
Pipeline Equity, so 2es.com.
Awesome. Any other social media sites? I know that you're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
And Instagram.
Yeah, we just got
everywhere.
on Instagram too. I love it. Perfect.
So it's all Pipeline Equity. All the handles across the board are the same. And we publish regular content. We have an Equity for All report. The updated one will be coming out April 10th. And people can also join us at our April 10th event.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katica. It has been a pleasure having you in here. I finally got your name right. Only took me an hour. So thank you so much. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube page. Once again, you can find more information about Pipeline Equity in the description below. And have a wonderful day.
Thank you.